all of these were examples from other New Testament verses of how that word is used, and often in the sense of more of a spiritual darkness or a moral darkness, but it does also mean the physical darkness as well. So we can see that because Jesus endured the skatos, for us, we can turn from skatos to the light by the power of the Spirit. But if we reject Christ, we will be cast to the outer skatos, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For the Jew, this darkness was also clearly associated with God's judgment. They had seen it during the plagues on Egypt prior to the Exodus. Darkness would also feature prominently in the day of the Lord, which will also be the outpouring of God's judgment on the world. And so let's read about that. There are a couple of verses, Revelation 8:12 and 16:10.
The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night. The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongue in anguish and cursed the God of heaven for their pain and their sores.
So as Revelation tells, at the end there is going to be, darkness is going to be one of the factors, one of the plagues that comes upon the earth. And then one more reference from the Old Testament, Amos 8:9. Oh, I may have given that to Victor. Can somebody pick that up real quick? Amos 8:9. Amos 8:9. So Amos is prophesying of that day when darkness is going to come in what normally is broad daylight. The sun's going to go down and be darkened. Now, it's important to note that this darkness is not coming from Satan, nor is it because God has left the scene or is absent. John MacArthur put it this way: the darkness was not caused by the absence of God, but rather by his presence in full judgment, vengeance, and fury. Infinite wrath, moved by infinite righteousness, released infinite punishment on the Son. Because he is infinite, in just 3 hours, Jesus was able to absorb all the punishment of eternal hell for all who will ever believe. So again, we shouldn't look on this as some kind of passivity or God withdrawing or not being there. He was very present and very active at that moment. So we might wonder, well, how pervasive, how widespread was this darkness? Luke says darkness fell upon the land. The gospel writers are implying, when they describe this, that it was extensive. Archaeologists have uncovered 3 writings from that period. There was a Greek named Dionysius. He was a scientist who was living in Heliopolis, Egypt, and he reported experiencing the darkness. Another Greek, Diogenes, wrote, either the deity himself suffers at this moment or sympathizes with one that does. So both of these statements by this pagan were true, though he didn't realize it. We don't know. It's certainly possible. The third account is from another Greek, Phlegon. He was living in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. He wrote that the day turned into night at the 6th hour so that the stars were visible. And a great earthquake shook Bithynia in northwest Turkey. So it's interesting. There are some historical accounts that kind of line up with that. So, yeah, whether it was worldwide or not, we don't know, but it was certainly regional that it took place.
Probably didn't reach to Rome because there were a lot of people that would have written about it.
Yeah,
But it's kind of covering the general area about,
yeah.
at least go to the horizon of where they were.
Yeah, it might have happened and the writings never got found or something.
We don't know. It's kind of an argument from silence, but it's true. You would think that had it spread that far, somebody in Greece or Rome would have written it, but we don't know. Well, then we see verse 45 ends with the words that the curtain in the temple was torn in two. Now, Mark in his gospel adds the detail that the tear was from the top to the bottom. And this wasn't just a sheer curtain like you might have in your living room window. It was more like maybe more like a theater stage curtain, or even thicker than that. It's said that the curtain was as thick as a hand breadth. So, 4 to 6 inches, however wide your hand is that the curtain was that thick. So clearly this is the work of God, not of man. Charles Spurgeon has an interesting take on this. He uses some anthropomorphic language to express what's happening here. He says, as if shocked by the sacrilegious murder of her Lord, the temple rent her garments, like one stricken with horror at some stupendous crime. It is not a slight tear through which we may see a little light, but it is a tear from the top to the bottom. There's an entrance made for the greatest sinners. Well, this curtain, if you'll recall, separated the Holy of Holies from the people. And only the designated priest could go behind that curtain. And that was only once a year. The purpose was to make atonement for the people. The writer to Hebrews explains it in these words. Somebody has Hebrews 9, 6, and 7.
These preparations having thus been made, the priests go regularly into the first section, performing the ritual duties. But into the second, only the high priest goes, and he but once a year, and not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the unintentional sins of the people.
So with the curtain torn, we no longer require this priest to be our go-between between man and God. Jesus made a way for us directly to approach God through his blood. The barrier was removed. Again in Hebrews 10, 19 to 22 makes this point.
Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. And since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from the evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water.
So there the writer to Hebrews helps us understand what's happening here, that this way that Jesus made for us. Well, here's a diagram just kind of as a reminder, and it's not exactly to scale or anything, but the entrance began with the brazen altar, and here this is representing the cross of Christ, and then we come to the laver, the bronze laver, representing sanctification. Then there was the holy place, which contained the table of showbread, Christ is the bread of life, and the lampstand, where Christ is the light of the world, and the altar of incense, Christ is our intercessor. And then there was the veil, there was the curtain that was torn that led the way to the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant, where Christ is the Word personified. And then on top of that Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, the blood of Christ that delivers from the penalty of power and sin. So again, kind of the layers there, and that veil being torn from top to bottom and opening the way directly to God. Verse 46, Luke records Jesus' final words. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. It says here that Jesus cried out with a loud voice. In Greek, the words there for loud voice are where we get our English word megaphone. So the person being crucified was challenged just to get a breath, much less say anything. But here we see Jesus speaking loudly. He meant for his words to be heard. It's not a whimper of defeat. It's a cry of victory. So let's also not miss the fact that these final words of Jesus are quoting Scripture. They're quoting the Psalms, Psalm 31, 1 through 5.
O Lord, I have come to you for protection. Don't let me be put to shame. Rescue me, for you always do what is right. Bend down and listen to me. Rescue me quickly. Be for me a great rock of safety, a fortress where my enemies cannot reach me. You are my rock and my fortress. For the honor of your name, lead me out of this peril. Hold me from the trap my enemies set for me. For I find protection in you alone. I entrust my spirit into your hand. Rescue me, Lord, for you are a faithful God.
Now note that Jesus didn't say that whole last verse. He just said the first part of it. In the ESV, that verse reads like this: into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. He didn't say that last part. He just said the first part. Into your hand I commit my spirit. Well, he left this off because his purpose was not to be ransomed himself, but the purpose was that he was giving his life as a ransom for many. Matthew 20, 25 to 28 has this also.
But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
The Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. And we see that here in his last words and looking back to the Psalms. Well, another point to consider is that since Jesus was sinless, he was not subject to the curse of Adam. In order for Jesus to die, he had to will it. He had to surrender his life. The timing of the day and the very hour were in his control. He died as the Passover lambs were being slain in the temple around 3 p.m. So we saw that his time on the cross began with the morning sacrifice. It encompassed the midday sacrifice. And now the final part of this Passover day, just before sunset, the Passover lambs are being slain at around 3 p.m., and that's when Jesus is dying too. And he also controlled the timing because he died before the soldiers could come by and break his legs. And again, that was a fulfillment of the messianic prophecy that not a bone of his body will be broken. So we see him not a victim here, but in control of all the events. Verse 47 says that the events deeply affected the centurion that was nearby. We don't know what it was exactly. Maybe it was the fact that Jesus was not struggling as others always did when they were about to be crucified, but rather he went as a lamb being led to the slaughter, and he didn't revile. Sometimes these men being crucified, they would cry out and revile people, and their words got so terrible that the Romans would cut out their tongues to have stopped them from talking because what they were saying was so terrible. Jesus didn't revile back in return. Maybe it was the supernatural 3 hours of darkness that affected the centurion's thinking, or the shock of Jesus shouting and then quickly dying rather than lingering for days. Maybe it was because of the great earthquake that Matthew tells us about. He had heard the testimony of that last Old Testament saint. Remember, we referred to the thief on the cross as maybe being the last Old Testament saint. Well, now he gives what we might want to call the first New Testament testimony. He praises God and proclaims, certainly, this man was innocent. Matthew records that the centurion said, truly, this was the Son of God. Well, then in verse 48, we read that the crowd had been observing the spectacle, and they returned home beating their breasts. This seemed like an unusual reaction to a crucifixion. That's usually a sign of lamenting or mourning or maybe even some contrition. We don't quite understand this, although some commentators suggest that while the crowd isn't really brokenhearted, they're not really mourning at this point, maybe there is some remorse that they're showing. And maybe this is in preparation for the message Peter's going to deliver on the day of Pentecost when he looks at them and tells them, you crucified this Jesus. Jesus' acquaintances and some of the women stood at a distance and they observed the crucifixion. We know this included the Apostle John. The other Gospels also mention Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary the mother of James and Joseph. Later on, in the next chapter, Luke mentions that Joanna was part of the group, so we know there were at least those women. May have been more, but those at least are identified for us. These women are helpless, and they can only stand by and mourn. The Son of God died a substitutionary death. He died in our place. He took on our punishment and died that we might live. On one level, we understand these facts, but there's much more here that we can't grasp. Jesus took on our sin, but God cannot sin, so did he cease being deity? Was he temporarily not part of the Trinity? Well, certainly not. Jesus cried out, asking God not to forsake him, but God can't be split apart. Jesus was not abandoned to Sheol, but God cannot tolerate sin either. So our minds are really limited in grasping what's going on here. Our words are limited too. They fail us. But we can know the basics. We can't understand the basic things, even though we don't understand the full depth of it. And I would just say this is maybe one more reason why we need to preach the gospel to ourselves every day, that we can meditate and consider the depth of the cross. Well, let's do a little application here. Let's think about a question. We often hear people say this phrase, well, we all have our cross to bear. And we usually say that to mean that we've got these inconveniences or difficulties in life that we have to contend with. But for the Christian, it means more than that. So let me ask, what do you think Jesus meant when he called us to take up our cross and follow him? What does that mean to you?
To die to self,
To die to self?
to give up, those who give up their lives gain it, but we are putting everything aside so that we can follow him. So,
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Trust and believe. Comfort.
I'm sorry,
trust and believe.
to trust and believe. Yeah.
Give up some of our comfort to really, really serve him.
Yeah. Yeah, comfort's a big thing in this country, isn't it? Especially in this day and age. It's, yeah. Okay, we'll move on.
But there's a discomfort of when people do fully follow, because it's not
Well, a comfort of God versus the comforts of the world or being comfortable in the world, yeah.
because there's going to be real things come against you and people don't like it, and so it's not about being popular.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. The narrative of Jesus' burial begins in verse 50. Luke tells us that a man named Joseph from the town of Arimathea was involved here. Now, we don't know where Arimathea is located. Some believe that it's a hill town somewhere within 20 miles of Jerusalem. That may have been his original home, but it seems likely that he's probably relocated to Jerusalem or closer to Jerusalem because he's a member of the council. He's one of the 71 members of the Sanhedrin that we just were talking about a couple of weeks ago. Luke makes it clear here that he did not go along with the actions of the Sanhedrin against Jesus that day. So this leads a lot of people to think that maybe he wasn't present at some of those meetings that were taking place in the middle of the night, or the events that took place from Caiaphas early in the morning. Maybe he wasn't there. Now, Matthew adds the fact that Joseph was rich. We kind of get that idea, but Matthew makes it very clear. And Luke describes him here as a good and righteous man who was looking for the kingdom of God. That seems like a really key point. He has a sense of expectancy about the coming kingdom of God. When John talks about Joseph, he refers to him as a secret believer. And John also adds that Nicodemus came along too, and he helped to take Jesus down from the cross and to bury him. So these secret believers now display great courage by going to Pilate and requesting the body of Jesus. Verse 53 says that Joseph took Jesus' body down off the cross. We're not given any details here, but we can only imagine this must have been a very difficult task to take that dead weight down. Some would imagine that Joseph is doing this task on his own. I think it's probably more likely that he had some help. He's a wealthy man. He probably has servants. He's probably enlisted them to come along and help. Nicodemus is there, so it just doesn't seem like a one-man job to get somebody off of the cross. So however it happened, we know that Nicodemus and Joseph are the key players here. Well, there's some urgency to get this done because the law says that the bodies need to be taken down before sundown. And we know now it's after 3 o'clock. Sundown's going to be around 5 or 6 at night. So the daylight hours are drawing short here. The Romans don't care. They would just leave a body up on the cross forever, and even after the person died, they'd leave it there and just let it decay or let the scavenging animals come by. They didn't care less. Sometimes they might take the body down and throw it into a mass grave or throw it, in a smoldering fire that was taking place at the dump. They had no respect at all. But the Jews had enough respect for the body that even for a criminal, they were going to take him down before the day was out. So we see that Joseph and Nicodemus lovingly care for Jesus' body. It's wrapped in a linen shroud and placed in a tomb where no one has ever been laid. Matthew adds the detail that it was in fact Joseph's own tomb where they laid Jesus. And this fulfills the prophecy of Isaiah 53:9. Somebody has that.
And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth.
Jesus died with the wicked, with the two thieves, and he's in death. He's in this rich man's tomb, in Joseph's tomb. Well, Joseph and Nicodemus, and presumably the women that were there, they apply some spices as they're wrapping up this body. The Jews didn't embalm bodies, but rather they would line the body with these spices to counter the smell of the decay. This all had to be done hurriedly. Again, the daylight hours are growing short, and they have to complete it before the Sabbath begins at sunset. So the women are there. The women saw where the body was laid, and we'll see that becomes important on Resurrection Sunday because they know where to go. So they see where the body was laid. They prepared some spices and ointments. Probably when they come back, they're going to apply more, finish the job that they hurriedly began here on this Friday. So they're planning to return after the Sabbath and complete the process of wrapping and applying the spices to the body. Well, there are a couple of art pieces I want to share with you. One is from Albrecht Dürer, the German artist. This is a wood carving. It's called the Entombment, and it's part of a number of panels he made that were called the Small Passion. And here we see his expertise in woodcut, and we can see the sorrow, the anguish of Christ's followers. We do see the hole in Christ's hand. Probably more likely would have been in the wrist in order to support the weight. We see the nail holes in his feet, and just the tender care the men are exercising and laying down, and the mourning on the face of the women. And then one other one. This is from Sisto Bartoloccio. This was painted in 1610. And here again, we see the compassion of the men, the anguish, the mourning of the women. Again, in both of these, Jesus' body is pretty sanitized, right? We don't see any of the effects of the whipping or the beating or the blood. It's pretty clean. But really, the emphasis here in these paintings is just the care of, the tender care of the men laying him to rest and the mourning of the women.
Are they putting him into a hole there, or is that? It's not a hole, but by their.
No, I think they're laying him on a slab. You know, it says, one of the Gospels says he was laid on a bench. And so the thought is, again, they're in haste, so they're probably laying him there on the bench with the intention of moving him, into the shelf later on. Well, then this section ends with the comment that they rested on the Sabbath day according to the commandment. And we would just note that on the first Sabbath day, remember, God finished this old creation in 6 days, and then he rested on the Sabbath. And here we see that Jesus finishes the new creation in 6 hours, and he also rests on the Sabbath in Joseph's tomb. But as we know, that's not the end of the story. Sunday morning is coming. So let's have a couple of discussion questions here just by way of application. As always, we want to ask, what do we see about God from this passage?
Fulfillment of prophecy.
God fulfills prophecy and keeps his word. Yeah.
He's faithful.
Yeah.
When the people think it's all over, it's only just the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, we learn later the disciples really don't recall his words just yet.
They don't understand.
They don't understand, yeah.
It's really like pedestrian. It's so close. Like to think that like a God man would die so just close to the human condition, right? Like a plebeian, right? Like a poor man, like terrible.
Yeah.
Not even like no dignity. And these that's probably why these people are like, is this how it goes down? Like what is just to hear it, it was like so inconsequential, it seemed like. I'm like, who is this guy? Like he can't be a God man. Like died like a freaking, like a poor man.
Well, let's think about this. What do you find significant about Jesus' final words, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit? He knew where he was going, yeah.
I don't know, maybe my job is done here.
Right. Yeah, Luke doesn't record it, but the other Gospels record him saying it is finished. So yeah, I think that's exactly right.
But then he descended into hell. But
Those were his last words.
Yeah, these are his last words, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just puts a, for me, Father, why have you forsaken me? And then to close it with that is like, it always goes back to, like, I'm, I'm tied to you,
Mhm.
put my faith in you.
Yeah,
It-
yeah,
like, in that human condition, I still put my faith in you.
yeah. I commit my spirit. Yeah, I'm putting myself in your hands. Yeah. All right, well, then one final one. Sometimes our life on earth as Christians can feel like we're in a battlefield. So, what are some things you can do to encourage other battle weary believers in your life? That should be believers. Missed an R there.
Ask them how it's going. It does get tiring at times. It's a mental battle.
Mm.
I think oftentimes we all feel like our condition is special, like nobody really, especially if we're going through tribulations. And the more I think about these things, the more I see, the more like I listen. I always go back to like, just read the Bible. It's not that bad. We all think we've endured some unique, tribulation, but it doesn't get worse than that.
But I do think that believers, we are in a battle every day, and if we don't realize it, then we're not really in the battle. But I think we need to encourage people that who are doing, it is tiring at times.
Well, we should be prepared for this too, because Paul tells us to encourage one another. So,
That's the way it is.
yeah.
But some churches are overly, that's all they talk about, you know what I'm saying? And they're so into that they overly emphasize that. Some are in the middle, and then some don't mention it, you know what I'm saying?
It's kind of like that the battlefield is carrying the cross. And so to encourage other people who are doing that, sometimes there's nothing you can say, but just let them know that you're praying for them and you're beside them and
Mm.
That
Just-
makes a huge difference to
just
to
being
people,
with them.
just to recognize it. Not, you can't sort out the problem, but that makes a big difference.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
You're asking about people and caring about them. It's when people can feel alone at times.
Yeah.
I would say go on a fence. The fence is first the fence, right? So you gotta be like proactive. Not like just, I'm doing my thing, I don't care if you judge me. Why are you not doing this?
Hmm.
Working with people, right?
Well, I also think that was the ultimate example. The Lord was not going to let anyone have any victory other than God in all of this. And, like today, I probably shocked her. I wasn't going to come tonight because I was really tired. And, I just popped in my brain and I said, I'm not going to allow Satan to have victory today. Just not going to allow it. I'm here. And, it's, again, it was just a blessing, just, seeing the example, that the Lord, set for all of us.
Hmm.
I think too, just being with believers strengthens us. As much, of course, God's word, but just being with believers, it strengthens me.
Yeah.
It's a win.
It's what?
It's a win. Every day, you win.
I'm a weakling, I confess,
So,
not just physically. And I get down on myself quite a bit for not being successful in some of the battles, spiritual battles. Sometimes God gives me victory. Plenty of times I don't get the victory, not because of God, because of myself mostly, or maybe the enemy. But I'll take most of the blame. And I forget that, I too often forget that it's a war. It's not just a battle. There's a lot of battles in that war, a lot of them. And I don't know what percentage I might win or not win. But the battle goes on, the war goes on, and other battles come along. And tonight, I almost didn't come because I was embarrassed and feeling bad because I didn't do too well in a certain particular battle that was presented. And, but I thought, to your point, I'm going to come and be among my fellow believers and hopefully get encouraged, and I've been encouraged. And, yeah, anyhow.
Thanks, John.
God remains faithful. I'm giving him the word. We're not so faithful.
Yeah.
Rain, it was like, you're not going to go in that rain and risk your life again.
Well, thanks for risking your life and coming out tonight.
Well, I would be better off.
All right, well, let me close in prayer and we'll be on our way.